building and provisioning your first virtual desktop. Are you excited? You should be, because this is really, if you think about it, we're only on the fourth nugget in this series, and you're already getting to build your first virtual desktop. Now, admittedly, we're not going to do anything terribly, we're not to the really cool stuff yet. What we're going to do in this nugget is get that first VM kind of up and running. And we'll use that as a template for later on. But for now, we kind of have to go through some of the basic foundational pieces of building virtual desktops so that you'll be ready to create them when the time comes. Interestingly enough, when you get that View connection server up and running, that's all you need to put in place. Other than your vSphere, I'm assuming you already have vSphere up and running. But that's all you have to put in place in order to start getting users talking to desktops. As long as I have a VM somewhere in vSphere or even a physical computer, I've got a desktop that's ready for deployment. Now, with these virtual desktops, VMware and View, we think of these desktops in terms of pools. You're going to create many different kinds of pools throughout this series. There are actually 4 different kinds of VM pools. But before we figure out what the type of VM pools are, you have to figure out what a VM pool is in the first place. A virtual machine pool is designed as a collection of virtual machines that are there for a particular use. Okay, so these are the ones for the finance users. These are the ones for my external contractors. And also, they're defined by how they're created. Okay, where do they come from? It's this second question that defines the 4 different types of VM pools. So we can create very basically some manual pools if we want, or a manual pool. A manual VM pool is exactly what you think it is. There's no automation built into it. It will not automatically provision new VMs as necessary, but it's really, really simple. If I create 10 VMs inside of vCenter, well, then I can create a VM pool and point it at that set of VMs and say, okay, you manage those VMs and assign them to people as they come in. So simple, easy, not terribly flexible, but pretty easy to set up. And we'll do that in this nugget. Now, if you want to go and add more automation into the entire process, well, that's when we start getting into the different kinds of automated pools, those that involve either full virtual machines or linked clone virtual machines. If you play with virtual machines for any period of time, you've got to be familiar at this point with snapshots. And if I create a snapshot of a virtual machine, well, then that ends up becoming a new VM that's based off of the old VM. These linked clone virtual machines are essentially snapshots off of some kind of golden image somewhere. And we implement them because creating just full virtual machines involves a lot of disk storage space. You think about it, how much disk does it require for an entire VM as opposed to a snapshot? And with storage being expensive, well, these linked mode virtual machines can be a good idea. The last piece down here is terminal services and RDS pools. And this is, admittedly, it's kind of a wag on VMware's part to creating a fully functional VDI infrastructure, a la what you see with, for example, with Citrix, with XenApp and XenDesktop and all the integrations there. So at its most basic, the RDS pool, the terminal services pool, is essentially a pool that integrates in with your terminal services infrastructure. Let's just call it that for now. So I have manual, I have automated, and I have TS RDS pools. We're going to deal, as I said, with a manual pool now because it's very simple to do. The more advanced automated pools, like those involving linked clone virtual machines, require the assistance of View Composer, which we haven't installed just yet. Now, when you go to create a new VM, there are going to be a series of activities that you have to do in the right order to put all the pieces in place so that VM can work with View. Step 1 is to install an operating system. Okay, create that VM object, install the operating system, join it to a domain, enable remote desktop, and then run through a series of optimization activities. These optimization activities are there with 2 goals in mind. Number 1 is performance. Number 2 is storage. We want to reduce all the unnecessary we want to reduce the surface area of the machine, eliminate all the unnecessary processes and services and stuff that don't really make sense in a virtual desktop environment. Removing those means that there's less processor cycles being burned, which means that there's more available for other VMs. On the storage side, there are also going to be a series of activities that add to storage. The creation of a hibernation file, the creation of system state restores, VSS's activities and its snapshots can add to the size of the VM that, because these, especially with linked clones, these linked clones are designed to be thrown away and then recreated from time to time, we don't really need them in this world. They make more sense in the physical world. I'll show you what some of these optimizations are here in a second. Once I've done with that, or in fact, usually you do this right after the installation of the OS, you want to install the VMware tools. And then we have to go about installing the View agent as well. Okay, you tend to install the View agent after the VMware tools because that's just the order they tell you to do it in. Once we're done with that, then we can go about creating that manual pool. Now, I want to just spend a minute here talking about some of those optimizations with Windows virtual machines. And I'm not going to go through this whole list. I just want you to be aware that this list actually exists. And in VMware's View Administration Guide, you will find this list, more or less, in some sort of format. As I said before, these are designed to improve performance, to reduce the number of things that are going on in a VM, and then to also reduce the storage that's being consumed. So disabling unused ports, changing things to a very basic display theme, disabling indexing, removing system restore points. Again, all this stuff that you really shouldn't have to worry about in a virtual desktop environment. Other things are more focused on eliminating storage, like deleting all the event logs and deleting the hidden uninstall folders and running the disk cleanup to remove those unnecessary bits. So these are for all of your virtual machine. There are actually another set down here for optimizing Windows 7 specifically. Disable IPv6 is kind of interesting unless you're actually using it. The idea here is that by disabling it, you're pulling that out of the network stack, which means fewer processes. That's one of the, this disable IPv6 is one of those contentious ones that I leave it up to you. You can also disable the setting that keeps track of the last file access time, change some VM video card RAM settings, things like that. But these are the tasks that are involved with the optimization activity for these virtual machines. They are entirely optional. You don't actually have to do these. You could actually create a virtual machine and run it without running any of these optimization tasks. They're just there to eke just as much performance as you possibly can out of the resources that you have. So with all of this fairly extended introduction, let's go in and actually take a look at View Administrator. Let's take a look at some of the buttons that need to be clicked in order to get this whole thing running. Here we are once again in the VMware View Administrator. I'm taking a look at the dashboard, a few of the components that are available. What we want to do, okay, one of the first things we're going to do, or one of the last things we're going to do is actually create that pool of potential VMs. In order to create that pool, though, we have to create a connection between View and vSphere or vCenter. Okay, what I want to do at this point is, so this is the View server. All right, I want to flip over here to my vCenter server. This server is vc.company.pri. And as I showed you earlier, we've built a data center, and in that a cluster, and then dropped 2 ESX hosts into that cluster. And then on top of those 2 ESX hosts, I've created this template here called W7-template. Okay, this is just a basic Windows 7 virtual machine. I've installed it. I've installed the VMware tools. It's got really no configuration there. It's just right out of the box, more or less. And so this is the machine that we're going to pull into VMware View for deployment out to users. Now, I'm showing you this at this point because it is this vc.company.pri vSphere server that we need to connect to down here under View Configuration. Okay, notice here vCenter servers. Okay, right now we don't have any because we haven't made any connections just yet. But if I click the Add button here, I can choose vc.company.pri and then provide it with a username and password. Now, normally this would be a username like a service account username. I'm just going to use my own username just because it's easy for this demo environment. But I'm going to drop in the username and then also the password associated with that username. Do I want to connect using SSL? And then down here in the bottom, do I want to specify some concurrent limits for the two different operations that are heavy performance operations? Those are provisioning and then power operations. Okay, we tend to leave these the same unless you want to apply hardware to it or remove hardware from it. Now, down at the bottom here are some View Composer settings for enabling View Composer. I'm not going to turn this on just yet because obviously I haven't installed View Composer onto that computer. If I choose OK, it will go through and do all of the authentication that's necessary to connect vCon with VC. Once we're complete, you'll see that the vCenter server, vc.company.pri, is now available here in the list. So this is the first step, is in making that connection from View to vCenter. Okay, now let me pop back to vCenter. Okay, I've got one virtual machine. Okay, I've kind of partially set up this virtual machine so that you could take a look at it. Let me actually remote this virtual machine because I want you to see this virtual machine in full screen. It's kind of challenging to actually see in that little tiny screen there in the lower right hand corner. So I got a VM. Okay, I've installed it. I've put different configurations here. I've added the run item in here just because it's convenient in the network item. I've installed the VMware tools, which is what's making this a much better experience. That last step here is to install the VMware View agent. Okay, we're creating a golden machine. This is real simple, very much simple, similar to how you created your golden images when you're deploying physical desktops. You know, anything that I want to make available to users, I've got to put it on this desktop so that the users can access it whenever they connect in. Here's the View agent. Also a very unexciting installation. I choose Next here, accept the license agreement, and that takes me to this custom setup screen. Really, the only option you have to think about here within this screen are which of the features that you want to enable here with this VMware View agent. Okay, a lot of different features. Okay, USB redirection. Do I want my users to be able to plug in a USB device and have it redirected into the session? Okay, it can be useful. Am I going to use this virtual machine with View Composer? I absolutely am going to a little bit later. Do I want to support virtual printing, which is a topic for a little bit later on, but recognize that printing gets kind of odd when the virtual machine is somewhere else. If I'm sitting here in Denver and my virtual machine is in Indiana, well, how do I facilitate printers? So we have to have that virtual printing feature in there to support that, because I don't want to be printing a document out to Indiana and have to have them send it to me. Do I also want to support PCOIP or PC over IP? A lot of us are going to want to. PC over IP offers a much far superior user experience over this version of RDP. Do I want to support smart cards as well? I'll just turn this on just so everything's available. And then do I want to support View persona management, or do I want to deal with the profile stuff, the user data that's on this machine? Typically, you will install all of these unless you have a specific reason not to. So next, an install actually completes the installation of that VMware View agent. I am once again going to pause the recording, and when I come back, the agent will be installed and the subsequent reboot will be completed. And we're back. So completed the View agent installation, did a reboot. As you can see, I'm back here in the Control-Alt-Delete prompt here with that Windows 7 template machine. Recognize that although I'm calling it a template here, if you played with virtual machines and templates before in vCenter, this is not a template. This is actually a virtual machine because I'm going to pull this into a manual mode pool. A little later on when we start talking about automated pools, I'm going to convert this into a vCenter template. But for now, this is just a regular, standard, run-of-the-mill virtual machine. Let me switch back over here to vCon. Okay, back in the VMware View Administrator. I've made my connection here to the vCenter server. And now at this point, what I want to do is create that pool. Okay, I've got that virtual machine. I want to pull it into a pool so that I can provision it to users that are coming in requesting a virtual desktop. I'm going to choose the Add button here, and it's going to bring up a fairly rich interface for all the options that I may want to select for creating that pool. One of the neat things I like about this interface is that different pool types are going to support different feature sets. Right? Terminal server and physical computers or blade PCs don't work well in automated pools because I can't automatically provision a physical computer. It makes a lot of sense, right? But in a manual pool, as you can see here, well, I can actually support that, even though I don't support View Composer. So knowing what these items are comes in handy as you identify which the settings you're going to set for this pool. I need to create a manual pool here because I have an existing set of virtual machines. In this case, the set is equal to 1, but this is the type of pool that does not involve managing the virtual machines from VMware views. In other words, there's no automated provisioning here. I'm just dealing with VMs that already exist. If you have P2V user desktops and your users have a one-to-one user to desktop in a situation in an already existing environment, well, you're probably going to have to create a manual pool because those VMs already exist. If you're a greenfield situation where you're creating a brand new virtual environment of new virtual machines that are all kind of basic configuration, well, then you can choose an automated pool. But these manual pool recognize that VMware wants you to get off of manual pools and onto automated pools because that's where you get all the benefits of virtual desktop deployment. For now, though, I have my single VM here in a manual pool. I'm going to choose a floating user assignment, which means that any user that connects, if they have the right permissions, can contact or connect up into that virtual machine or any other VMs in the pool. I choose next here. What is my desktop source? Can I choose either a vCenter virtual machine or other sources? Now, in this case, this could be VMs not managed by vCenter. Okay, some other virtual machine out there. A common situation here would be, for example, VMware Server, not VMware vCenter Server, but VMware Server. Could be terminal servers, could be physical desktop, could be blade PCs, anything like that. Those are going to be your alternative sources. Now this is a vCenter virtual machine, so I'm going to choose that and choose next. I should, if everything goes well, see my vCenter server here, vc.company.pri. That's great. I'm going to create a pool ID here called my manual pool. I can give it a display name too if I want. There is the display name. And I can choose a folder. I'm going to put this in the root. A little later on, when we talk about rights and permissions, you will get a better feel for why you would create folders. But for now, recognize that folders are a nice way to separate out different sets of resources from other sets of resources for administrative reasons. So there's my manual pool. Oops, I forgot to get rid of the spaces here. And choose the next button. And I've got some settings here for that pool. Okay, do I want to enable it? Or do I want to keep it disabled? Do I want users to be able to talk to it immediately? Has some remote settings here. Do I want to apply a remote desktop power policy? When the users log out, do I want to make sure that desktops are always powered on? Do I want to suspend them? Do I want to power them off? Or do I want to just do whatever they were left in? Remember, this is a manual pool, so when the user logs out, well, do I want to make that machine available to the user, or do I want to spin it down? Okay, so there's a lot of options there. Do I want to log off after the user disconnects? Think about that. That user, I think we were talking about in the last nugget, that user goes through the train tunnel and there's a disconnection. Well, do I want to log them off? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, and this choice never is the default answer. I'm going to leave it at that. Do I want users to be able to reset their desktops? Okay, do I want to give them the virtual power button for those desktops so they can reset them if something happens? Okay, I'm going to choose yes, choose no. I'll choose yes so that they have the ability to do that. Do I want a user to have multiple desktops or simultaneous desktops? Yes or no. By choosing no here, I can restrict those users down to one desktop experience and know that they're not going to be creating multiple connections and then tying up my resources. Do I want to support PC over IP or the RDP protocol? The RDP protocol, as you probably know, is associated with remote desktop services or terminal services. Either of these are available. The PC over IP protocol, at least with this version, is perhaps going to offer a slightly better, or maybe more than slightly better, user experience. It may, however, not operate as well over wide area network connections. We'll talk more about RDP versus PC over IP a little later on. Do you want users to choose the protocol? Do you want users to set a maximum number of monitors or the resolution of a monitor? And do you want to identify flash settings for Adobe Flash? All of these settings are defined on the pool. Now I need to add virtual machines into that pool. Now, only the virtual machines that are compatible with this pool type are going to be shown in this screen. And I can choose to show the incompatible ones, but may I recommend you really don't ever check that box. This is just here so you can see, well, wait a minute, did I make a mistake? Why is my VM not there? Can VMware View even see the VM, or is it just simply incompatible? So I'm going to add this single VM, W7-template, into this pool, because it's the only VM that I have. Choose Next. It gives me the Ready to Complete. I choose the Finish button, and we go about completing the creation of that pool. And so there you have it, some of the very basics of how to create your first virtual machine and then also create a manual pool out of that virtual machine. Now, admittedly, we've only sort of scratched the surface here in this whole virtual desktop pool creation. As you can imagine, once we create the pool, well, there are a number of other settings that are required in order to make that whole grouping of virtual machines available for use by connecting users. Not the least of which is in giving the users the correct rights and permissions, which VMware here calls entitlements, so that they can, well, connect into the right machines. There are also some other user experience settings, all of which we'll talk about here in this next nugget when we start focusing in on the client experience and getting that client connected up to those virtual machines. But for now, what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about building and provisioning your first virtual desktop. We started by talking about, all right, well, what is a virtual machine pool? And why are virtual machine pools important for the ultimate connection of users up to their virtual desktop assets? We talked about VMware View's 4 different kinds of VMware pools. And while we focused on the manual pool type in this nugget, we kind of hinted a little bit about these newer and more exciting automated pool types involving full virtual machines and linked clone virtual machines that we can add whenever we start implementing in that VMware View Composer functionality. Talked a little bit about TS and RDS pools, which are pools of terminal services or remote desktop services computers. Then we discussed the order of activities in building and provisioning a desktop VM. Got to install the operating system and then the VMware tools. Then we got to go through joining the domain, enabling remote desktop. We've got to optimize that virtual machine, install the View agent before we go about creating that pool. And then lastly, we went through and stepped through the whole building and provisioning of a manual desktop pool within VMware View. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.